Hey there, future coder. Are you ready to start your exciting journey into programming? Well, you're in the right place. Today we're going to talk about something super important in coding variables. Think of variables as the ABCs of coding. Just like you need to learn the alphabet before you can read or write, you need to understand variables before you can really start programming. Variables are like magic boxes in your code. They can hold all sorts of things, from numbers to words to lists of information. And the best part, you can use these boxes over and over again in your programs. So, are you ready to dive in and learn all about variables? Great, let's get started on this awesome adventure. By the time we're done, you'll be amazed at how much you've learned. Okay, let's break it down. A variable is simply a container in your code. It's a place where you can store information that you want to use later. Think of it like a labeled box. You put something in the box, give it a name, and then you can find it easily whenever you need it. In coding, we use variables to hold all sorts of data. It could be a number, like your age, or text, like your name. The great thing about variables is that they can hold pretty much anything you want them to. Variables make our lives so much easier. Imagine if every time you wanted to use your name in a program, you had to type it out completely. With variables, you just type it once, and then use the variable name whenever you need it. Variables also make our code more flexible. Instead of writing the score directly into your code, you use a variable. This way, when the player's score changes, you just update the variable. Now let's look at a simple example of how we use variables. One of the most basic ways to use a variable is something like this: x equals 5. In this example, x is the name of our variable. It's like the label on our box. We can choose almost any name we want for our variables, but it's good to pick names that make sense. The equals sign doesn't mean equals like in math. In coding, it means assign or put this value in the box. So x equals 5 is really saying put the number 5 in the box labeled x. Once we've done this, we can use x anywhere in our code where we want to use the number 5. The real magic happens when we can change what's in the variable. We could write x equals 10 later in our code, and from that point on, x would represent 10 instead of 5. This is why variables are so powerful. They let us work with changing values in a simple way. While our x equals 5 example is a great start, variables can do so much more than just hold numbers. In fact, variables can store all kinds of information. Let's explore some of the different types of data that variables can hold. One common type of data is text, which programmers often call strings. If we wanted to store someone's name, we might write something like name equals Alice. Here, name is our variable, and it's holding the text Alice. Variables can also hold true or false values, which we call booleans. For example, is underscore sunny equals true could represent whether it's sunny outside. Lists are another type of data that variables can store. We might have favorite underscore colors equals red, blue, green to keep track of someone's favorite colors. The great thing about variables is that they can adapt to hold different types of data as our program runs. Variables give us this flexibility to work with our data in whatever way we need. Section 5. Variables across different programming languages. Now that we understand what variables are, let's talk about how they work in different programming languages. While the basic idea of variables is the same across languages, the way we write them can be a bit different. In Python, which is a popular language for beginners, using variables is super simple. We can just write x equals 5 or name equals Alice, and we're good to go. Python figures out what type of data we're using automatically. This makes it really easy to get started with variables. In other languages like Java or C++, we need to be more specific. We might write int x equals 5 to tell the computer that x is going to hold an integer, a whole number. Or we might write string name equals Alice to say that name will hold text. This might seem more complicated, but it can help prevent mistakes in bigger programs. Some languages like JavaScript let us do both. We can write let x equals 5 to keep things simple, or we can be more specific if we want to. The important thing to remember is that no matter what language you're using, the basic idea of variables as containers for data stays the same. Section 6. Real-life examples of variables. To really understand variables, it can help to think about how they relate to things in our everyday life. Variables are all around us, even if we don't always think of them that way. Let's look at some examples to make this clearer. Think about your school locker. It's a lot like a variable in coding. Your locker has a number, its name, And you can put different things in it, its value. One day you might have books in your locker, the next day you might have your gym clothes. The locker stays the same, but what's inside can change, just like a variable. Or consider a scoreboard at a sports game. The team names stay the same throughout the game like variable names, but the scores keep changing like variable values. Even a recipe can be thought of in terms of variables. The ingredients are like variables. Flour equals 2 cups, sugar equals 1 cup, and so on. If you're doubling the recipe, you're basically changing the values of these variables. And just like in coding, using these variables makes it easy to adjust the recipe as needed. Section 7. Why variables matter in coding. Variables are fundamental in coding. They make our code efficient and readable. Understanding them is key to good programming. Variables simplify code by avoiding repetition. Change information in one place, not everywhere. They make programs flexible and adaptable. Code can handle different inputs easily. Variables store and manipulate data dynamically, like storing a player's score in a game. Section 8. Variables, the building blocks of programs. Think of variables as the building blocks of your programs. Just like you can build amazing things with Lego bricks, you can create incredible programs with variables. They're the foundation that everything else in your code is built on. When you start writing more complex programs, you'll find that you're using variables all the time. You might use them to keep track of a user's input, to store the results of calculations, or to control how your program behaves. As you get more comfortable with variables, you'll start to see all the ways they can make your code more powerful and flexible. Variables also help us break down big problems into smaller, more manageable pieces. Instead of trying to handle all our data at once, we can use variables to work with small chunks of information at a time. Section 9. Common mistakes with variables. Common mistakes with variables are normal. Learn from them and understand why they happen. One mistake is using a variable before initializing it. Always give your variable a value first. Another mistake is using the wrong data type. For example, doing math with text. Ensure your variables match the type of data they contain. Choose meaningful names for variables. Descriptive names help in larger projects. Section 10. Practicing with variables. The best way to really understand variables is to practice using them. Don't worry if it feels a bit confusing at first, that's totally normal. The more you work with variables, the more natural they'll feel. So let's look at some ways you can start practicing. One simple exercise is to write a small program that uses variables to store and display information. You could make a program that asks for a user's name and age, stores these in variables, and then prints out a greeting using those variables. This will help you get comfortable with creating variables, assigning values to them, and using them in your code. Another good practice is to try changing the values of your variables and see how it affects your program. If you have a program that calculates the area of a rectangle, try changing the length and width variables to different values. This will help you understand how variables can make your code flexible and reusable. Section 11. Your next steps in coding. Congratulations. You've taken your first big step into the world of coding by learning about variables. This is a huge achievement and you should be proud of yourself. But remember, this is just the beginning of your coding journey. There's so much more to learn and explore. Now that you understand variables, you're ready to start learning about other fundamental concepts in programming. Things like loops, which let you repeat actions in your code, or conditional statements, which let your program make decisions. These concepts build on what you've learned about variables, so you'll be using your new knowledge right away. As you continue learning, don't be afraid to experiment and make mistakes. That's how we all learn. Try writing your own small programs using variables. Maybe you could make a simple calculator, or a program that tells a short story using variables for the character names and actions. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become. Happy coding!